something disturbing that has been happening in the world. In addition to all the other disturbing things, of course, that are in a state of crescendo, exponentially increasing in becoming more saturated, more present and dominating, is the way people have come to not just look at, but expect how, in our case, a Buddhist monk is supposed to speak, instruct, teach. This is something that I've been noticing for approximately 35 years. And it's become quite pronounced in the way that individuals, the public today, every time they look at a Buddhist monk, there's certain expectations they have, and they're not the right expectations. They're not the important expectations. They're looking for the superficial things. The stereotype is what I'm referring to. In fact, it is not a stereotype anymore. It is an expectation, something that is the norm that they've come to construct in their mind. And that is the culture today we have. It is perpetuated by none other than those bhikkhus, those Buddhist monks that have neglected to consider the role of what a Buddhist monk is supposed to be. So they've lowered the bar to fit the palates of supporters. You have examples like, very famous monks, known monks, not just in the Theravada tradition. Of course, they were not so well known, let's say, as the Vajrayana or, celebrity monks, I call them, that are in the, pop culture. To the point where the listener have this notion that in order for an instruction to be legitimate, it has to be soft, it has to be very tenderly, very fluffy, sweet sounding, sweet tasting, and smooth. It needs to slide right through their ears, through their whatever you want to call it, and go in and be acceptable at the time. So it has to be very contemporary to the measures and standards of whatever today's society is considering to be appropriate and therefore valid. Basically, it has to fit the narrative. You have to fit into the mold that society has constructed. That is what today's Buddhist monks are doing. You go anywhere in the world, the image of a bhikkhu, or listen to any famous or any bhikkhu at any temple, but especially the famous ones, there are certain criteria that you will, just make those boxes and you will be able to check them one after the other. And you will see how they are, with each one of these boxes being checked, their intention is, unfortunately, that's what it has turned into, not to lose the supporter. To be liked, to be accepted. So when I said that this has been an issue for me for the past 25, but then I corrected myself by saying 35 years, because from the earliest days that I officially began in being as a student and a practitioner, and I was always surrounded by, I was serving and always at the feet of one bhikkhu and another and this, and then teachers from different traditions, nuns. And I would be curious as to the reactions of students towards certain teachers versus others. Of course, I was referring back also to the examples that were there available in the lives of teachers past. And I was comparing, which every student must do. Every person has to do. This goes beyond, by the way, the sphere of Buddhists or Buddhist practitioners, specifically Buddhist monks, and the public. No, this is throughout all the pedagogical institutions, all the teaching, educational, informative mediums or platforms you can think of, where there are individuals, at least they're supposed to be individuals that are there to help the public, society, become enriched with knowledge, understanding, and development of their being, their psyche, their bodies, their emotions, maturity to develop in them, and be able to learn how to identify what is truth from what is false. So you look around today, if you're a professor, anywhere, in any capacity, but specifically in the humanities departments in the world, in the social sciences departments, then if you happen to be soft-spoken, very, very soft-spoken, and you're very soft around the edges, and you're very malleable, you blend in beautifully, and you will go with whatever narrative the mass public throws at you, specifically through the media, news corporations and the mass media, mainstream media, and you abide by those ever-changing platforms, ever-changing voices out there, which basically is a single voice when you think of it, then you will be celebrated. Versus someone who holds their ground, who holds a position, who has some principles that are universal, that are, in fact, timeless. Values that don't change from day to day. Those are the ones that you are promulgating. If you happen to be that kind of a professor, an educator, a voice, you will be either brought down or criticized severely. Severely. People will stand in line to throw rocks and stones at you. Now, having said that about the, the secular realm, coming back to the Buddhist pedagogical institutions, specifically I'm referring to the bhikkhus, you have the same mechanism, because people are people. So what you have today, and for the last several decades, as I was mentioning, are bhikkhus, are teachers who have learned, have become trained in this modality of caving in to the palates, to the trends. Now this is where the Dhamma is going one way, and these characters are going in another, opposite direction. Despite the fact that they're wearing the robes of a bhikkhu, despite the fact that they are claiming to be speaking the Dhamma, they use terms, they use explanations, they might be quite eloquent, persuasive, charismatic, huge following, plenty of support, plenty of so-called legitimacy in that sense, and plenty of followers. So what they're doing is, the way it's being delivered, the way it's being spread, the Dhamma now, it's so watered down, it is so dumbed down, that when a listener or an actual student of the Dhamma comes across another teacher who is speaking the Dhamma from the heart, who is authentic, who is going back to the source, which is Lord Buddha's teaching, goes back to the Pali Nikayas, who doesn't water down anything, and is talking about practice, is talking about specifically Sangvega, the urgency to practice, which, by the way, is not something just, they make up, but it is, it's coming from the qualities of the Dhamma itself, that cannot be denied, cannot be, otherwise it's not Dhamma. You cannot push that aside and say, I'm going to be, the Dhamma has to come second. And the person's palate and being liked must come first. And that is the culture we have. Many of these bhikkhus come from the hippie culture that we have. Especially I'm talking about the Western monks. Hippie culture, either they or their parents were involved in that culture of, I think the saying was, make love, not war. Wear flowers in your hair. You had all that culture. They don't realize what it was all about, actually. They think it was all about peace. The sexual revolution, all that. It's all joined together. They don't realize that they brought in much of that gunk, that trash, with them. That individualistic way of thinking and softening even the tone of Lord Buddha's voice. And they've now created a new culture of practitioners, if you can call them that. Adherents or listeners of the Dhamma. Because these new listeners, attendees, these audiences, are now seeing that that is how a teacher is supposed to be. Because these individuals, don't forget, don't have access to the suttas. Pretty much, very much like many of these bhikkhus who don't have that. Many of them. Some of them do, and they will go ahead and play with, morph the Dhamma to make it very palatable, to create this lukewarm this fuzzy image of the Dhamma, where they quote-unquote integrate the Dhamma. They mix it up, the Mahayana with the Theravada, with bringing in the Vajrayana and calling it, well, we're all the same, we're all the same, we're all the same. So what you have here is the polluting of the Dhamma. Because when you're an audience member, when you've been trained to hear one type of one form of, one style of Dhamma discourse, or a commentary, or a lecture by, in this case, a Bhikkhu. And then you see the same format being played in different, from different sources, different outlets, different Dhamma centers, different Dhamma websites and YouTube channels, what have you. Then that becomes your norm. That becomes like, this is how a monk is supposed to be. This is how a teacher is supposed to be. Well, there's a big problem with that. That is not how a monk is supposed to be. Sometimes we are. Sometimes we're extremely soft-spoken. Sometimes, we're Buddhist monks. But do not make the mistake of making that the norm, because the Dhamma has surgical precision. It is unmistakable in its accuracy, in its sharpness, in its versatility. Lord Buddha was par excellence the best, the most versatile of all teachers. And when you look at how he taught, there's beauty, there's elegance, there's smoothness in the way he delivered, but at other times he is extremely precise and sharp and hard. He is even rough, often, depending on the situation, depending on the audience, depending on the level of Sangvega, whether it was there or not in his students. And if there weren't, he was extremely critical. You will not find these monks these days being critical. That's what I'm trying to say. So they've trained the ears of their audiences, of their students, to become softies. So today's audience, today's Dhamma audience has become quite soft. They become easily bruised, their egos. And then they blame whom? They blame the teacher. They say, well, this is an aggressive teacher. This is a rough teacher. Why is this teacher angry? Well, apparently they don't know anything about Ajahn Mun, Luangpo Mun. They don't know anything about Venerable Mahakassapa, Mahakachana. People, I've often mentioned this, when they come to the Dhamma, whether you're a monastic or a layperson, unless you're coming in as an arahant, which is extremely rare, and we don't normally see that except for in the suttas, as far as I know. We bring in our own stories, usually our own issues, our own emotional issues, our own emotional luggage, and specifically our, basically, attachment styles. Mommy and daddy issues. Whether we've had enough hugs, whether we've had enough acceptance or not. So please don't be fooled. If you're student of some very, well-respected monk or not, always bear that in mind, that even that monk, unless they're awakened, is going to have some mommy and daddy issues. I hate to break it to you, but that's what it is. We're dealing with human beings. So the acceptance, the seeking of acceptance is very much alive and well, not just in lay people, but also in monastics. That is something that I have witnessed throughout my life in religious circles, since the day that I went and entered a monastery at the age of 15. That was almost 40 years ago. You see this across the board. You see this across different religions. So this is a human problem. This is not just, in Buddhism, but as a Buddhist monk today, and based on what I have been seeing in Buddhist circles in Asia, I was seeing this in Malaysia, I was seeing this in Australia, I was seeing this in the UK, I was seeing this in Europe, I was seeing this in Thailand, I was seeing this everywhere. New Zealand, where there's this image that people expect you to be. And it's not the appropriate expectation, by the way. Of course, you're supposed to have some expectations, right? But that's not it. The expectation is what society is deeming today to be the acceptable norm. And you must fit that. And that means you have to forget about the truth of the Dhamma and really, really tweak it to the point where it becomes unidentifiable with Dhamma. You have examples of this. You look at Dalai Lama, that's what you see. You look at Thich Nhat Hanh, that's what you see. The very fact that you don't have monks talking about this is a testimony to what I'm saying. All you have to do is go back to the source, to go back to the teachings of Lord Buddha, to the example of the Arahants, and then match that, see, compare and contrast. That's your right, to compare and contrast, to see as to whether this teacher that you're respecting, whose books you're buying, whose lectures you're going to listen to, whose retreats you keep going and, lining up to attend, whether their teachings and their character, especially, match the authenticity, the unchangeability of the characters of Lord Buddha and his Arya Savakas. And then come talk to me. But people are so quick to judge. That's why I said this about a year ago, I think, that if Lord Buddha, no, actually 2 years ago, I was in Asia, I said it at a very famous monastery, I said, if Lord Buddha would show up today, even here at this major temple in Asia, he would be turned away, and they were stunned. He would be turned away because he would be too rough for their taste. He would be too, authentic for their taste buds. Too much. The suttas are full of examples where Lord Buddha would turn away people, would drive them away. Even monks who had come covered long distances to get there, to see Lord Buddha. Especially in those days with the roads in India being the way they were, traveling so difficult and dangerous. But they had brought with them their characters, unchanged characters, solid. And they wanted to see this guru, and they were disrespectful in their behavior. They were doing this and that. A teacher's job is to shake you and to bring you back to your senses, even if you've never had them. If you're going to touch the Dhamma, if you're going to get close to the Dhamma, then your hands must be clean. Your heart cannot be adulterated. You have to let go of your ideas about the Dhamma. But when you have people in place, like I was mentioning, people who came from a hippie culture, and now they're Mahatheras around the world. Pushing and squeezing, injecting, infiltrating the Dhamma with their own toxic ideas and presenting it as the Dhamma. Like this is what Lord Buddha meant. No. Translating entire, or at least trying to, claiming that they are, suttas, while it goes through their sifter of this wokeism. That's extremely dangerous. Not just for you. I mean, the person who's doing this so-called translations, the advocacy, all this nonsense. But especially for the people who are there to, who trust us, who trust in, the role that we are supposed to be occupying and the work that we're supposed to be doing. When I was a high school teacher, I used to, I was a biology teacher, by the way, and sciences and things. The world would be going through its, challenges and this and that. So students would raise some questions about, okay, why is this happening? What's your opinion, sir, on this? So whenever I was about to say something, even if they never asked me, let's say, and I was addressing an issue, and I would use a lot of similes and metaphors. Let's say if I was discussing life sciences or physical sciences or, chemistry and things like that, I had to use examples where teenagers could actually relate to. Otherwise, who cares about, photosynthesis being this way, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon, they didn't. So I had to use examples from their own lives. Now, it would get to certain, at times, I would feel compelled to share some of my ideas about what's happening in the world. Because they would ask and things like that. Now, I would make sure that I had to put a disclaimer there. Now, I was in a powerful position. A teacher is always in a powerful position. But not anymore now, because a teacher, if you say what you really want to say, you're kicked out. Especially if it's something wholesome. Especially if it's character building. Especially if it's, uplifting and not destroying of the human spirit. If you're sullying, dirtying the human spirit, if you're destroying our culture, then you actually have a future in this decrepit society we live. But anyhow, every time I gave my opinion, I made sure they knew that that was my opinion, because the students would look at you, especially if and when there was that trust, they would read and respect. From a teenager towards an adult, that's quite rare. It's quite lovely, in fact. So they would trust you, in fact, blindly, unless you tell them, hey, this is my opinion. So I realized early on the beauty of that. And that was probably one of the reasons why the student would respect the teacher, even more the adult, because they don't trust adults. If you've ever been a teenager, you know, right? But you giving them the heads up that, hey, this is my opinion, really puts things in perspective. Because you're saying, this is what they believe, but this is what I believe. This is my opinion, though. Please don't think of it as truth, as a law, let's say, right? As these laws, let's say laws of thermodynamics, because I was teaching them science, right? So similarly here, what you have, however, is the teacher pushing in their own agendas. If you're a monk and people are listening to you, reading your books, your podcasts, this and that, and you have, I don't know, millions of followers across Asia or across the world now, and you're just feeling like saying something and you say it without having it be validated, finding its roots within the Dhamma itself, words spoken by Lord Buddha or the Arya Savakas, which is tantamount to being the same, because they were all living the Dhamma. While you're not living the Dhamma, the person doing this, the inauthentic Dhamma that you're pushing down people's minds and hearts, at least you owe the public to say, by the way, I've always been against, let's say, the death penalty. All right? There's nothing wrong in saying that. But Lord Buddha never went against the rule of the land, the ruler of the land. He never criticized King Bimbisara or King Pasenadi or any of the other kings. Hey, you're not supposed to be doing this to your, let's say, prisoners, to the criminals of the country. But today you have Thai forest Mahatheras who are given these accolades, not only just by, their followers, by the king of Thailand, as the, authority and all that, claiming that, the government or country should be different than that. You should not be engaging in any kind of punishments like that. Well, who are you to say that? You're pushing in your own hippie ideas again. And that's where we are today. Punishment is, corporal punishment is being pulled away, left and right. Drugs are being pushed. I was in Thailand, I was in Asia, I've seen it. I was in Europe, in America, everywhere. Drugs are being pushed upon people. Legalization and all that, and then pushing them through different means. Drugs, drugs, drugs. And then you have these characters, these so-called monks, coming in from another front. So you have a battle, a war going on. And there's so many fronts to it. So now you have the so-called spiritual front also being manned by these pseudo-monks. Even though they're so-called legitimately ordained, etc., in their own respective traditions, have billions of followers and whatnot, and speak so eloquently, nicely, But how authentic is the Dhamma that they're teaching? What are they teaching? One of the first things, okay, some might ask, okay, could you get what is your what are you offering? Something simple you can look at. Is the teaching that is being provided by this teacher, I don't care who it is, it could be a layperson, it could be a monastic, it doesn't matter. I don't care which tradition it is. Is the teaching itself full of sangvega, the sense of urgency, spiritual urgency, to pull you out from your pain of being in samsara, not just now, not just for this life, but for all times. Sangvega it doesn't delay. telling people to do good, to be generous, to obey this, that. That oftentimes has nothing to do with Samvega. So the urgency to create Dhamma Chanda, the desire for the experiencing of the Dhamma within oneself, in order for you to break your shackles from getting more rebirth waiting for you over there once this life ends, is so important to understand. And no teacher should make that less important than what their agenda is to push down people's throats, their minds, their hearts. And another thing, no one's talking about death, seriously. They sugarcoat it. The Dhamma doesn't need any sugarcoating. It is honey. It doesn't need some teacher to come in and try to use their pizzazz or their charisma or their, eloquence. When a person is awakened, everything they touch is beauty. They don't fake it. You have a lot of fakers today. And that's what the audience is looking for, though. When you are not equipped with the understanding, the knowledge of something, then you will easily take it for something else. See it as something else. The example I keep giving to people every once in a while is, if you don't have a clue as to what a diamond really is, then every piece of glass is going to look to be diamonds to your eyes. You're going to take it as diamond. And that's what we have today, because the public usually today, because of this saturation of pseudo Dhamma or adhamma to be specific, spoken by these celebrity monks that you see, is the reason why the adhamma keeps perpetuating. Because they don't have the eyes to see. They don't have that, diamond setter's eyes to identify what is a piece of, glass versus what is a diamond. They can tell from the color of the diamond, if it is a diamond, by the way, or if it's not. The quality of the diamond. People don't have that because they're not practitioners, because they have been dumbed down. That's why you need to go to the suttas. That is, do not look for the Dhamma just anywhere. You need to go to where the Dhamma still is available. And it is not in temples. Okay? Many people didn't like this when I gave this talk, a talk on this several months ago. With that title, I think it was. They think that I'm trying to shake up the establishment. No, I'm not saying anything new, by the way. This has been spoken again and again and again throughout the suttas. Lord Buddha explains this, that this is what's going to happen in the end of days. There will be a lot of fake teachers who will push their own agendas. They will teach what is adhamma, but present it as Dhamma. They will live adhammic lives. They will live without sila, but they will pretend to be living the holy life, the brahmacharya. They will present themselves as such. Your job, the listener, the audience, those who are really interested in hearing the Dhamma, listening, they have some spark of urgency left in them. Dive head first into the suttas, into the words of Lord Buddha. I don't care where you go looking for them. But make sure they're the authentic ones, not the ones that are sullied by these modern pseudo, new agey, wokeist, which is the stupidest word I've ever heard, by the way, wokeism. Who comes up like, that must have been a double-digit IQ, whoever came up with that. Anyhow, those are the characters that are making this, dumbing down society. So don't be one of them. One of those audience members who just takes it without asking. Go inquire. Do your work. And then really understand that the character of a teacher of Dhamma, specifically of a Bhikkhu, is not going to be according to your dictates. It will be according to the Dhammas. People were criticizing Lord Buddha at times because he was disrespectful. How so? Because he was not following the norms of their society in India. He wasn't rising when an older person would show up. Or somebody else who had been a so-called religious teacher for a longer time than him. People would refuse to go to see Lord Buddha because he was younger. Although it might sound banal, he was the new kid on the block, with no disrespect meant here to Lord Buddha. But that was the attitude they had. If Lord Buddha was here in this time period, in our culture today, in your city, chances are you would not go see him. He would not look, sound, and behave the way you expected him to. Why? Because your expectations come from this pseudo-image that these stereotypical ideas that have been planted in your head since the 70s will not allow you to see the authentic Dhamma. So do not blame the Dhamma for your blindness. Because I cannot blame a dumb person, I cannot blame a person who doesn't know anything about jewelry or diamonds when they pick up a piece of glass and throw away an actual diamond. Because they don't know. But do you want to live the rest of your life not knowing, to be dumb? Or do you want to take charge of your life because nobody else is or can be in charge of your life other than you? Even when you're giving away the steering wheel of your life to somebody else. And Lord Buddha's main message was not to do that. Take control. That's why he said, Ehi Passiko. The Dhamma is about you coming, testing it for yourself. So don't be swayed left and right. You have all that you need in the example of Lord Buddha. You will have everything you need in the suttas. Stop being so soft. Softness has its place. You have to be soft. Otherwise you'll be rigid. And anything that's rigid, it's going to break. One time in martial arts class, this was when I was a teenager, the instructor, as we were training, and actually it was near the end of the class and we were just sitting and we were just like, steam was coming out of off of our bodies. It was cold outside too, but we had exercised and done so many So we were really exhausted, but we were sitting with eyes closed. We were sitting, trying to meditate, and he was speaking to us. And he gave us an image. I still remember it. He said, in Asia, there are typhoons. And the typhoon, in America, we call it hurricanes, right? And the typhoons are so powerful that when they come over and cross a landmass, those huge trees, oak trees and other trees that are like several meters in diameter, this typhoon comes and tears it into pieces like, toothpick, turns it into toothpick. Destroys it, shatters it. These huge, giant, over 100-year-old oak trees. But the bamboo tree, he said, will bend. Sometimes it might bend all the way down to the ground. But then once the typhoon, the storms, the heavy storms are over, it will slowly find its way back up, if it doesn't earlier than that. Because when you look at a bamboo, it has sections, segmented. When the segments, in between each segment, you have those rings, in between you have a hollow tube. But they are so sturdy that buildings, to this day, if you go to Thailand, you go to China, you go to Taiwan, you go to Cambodia, you go to Vietnam, Burma, all those Asian countries where they have tons of bamboo, they build several story high buildings and use bamboos for their scaffolding. Multiple people working at the same time around this building, this structure, standing on nothing but bamboos tied together. Several stories high. I've seen them. These hollow so-called tubes versus that powerful, sturdy, rigid tree. So no one can blame an authentic teacher, a Buddhist monk who's teaching the Dhamma, that they're being aggressive. They are the same people otherwise who would go and say Lord Buddha, to address Lord Buddha and call him, "You're disrespectful, Bhante. You're aggressive, Bhante. You're too rigid, Bhante. You're too rough. What are you angry at, Bhante?" Nagita, at one point, Venerable Nagita was Lord Buddha's attendant. And Lord Buddha, one time, he got up and he said, "What is this noise, Nagita?" And he says, "Bhante, these are the Brahmins who have come from the town, from the village, because they heard that you are in their region. So they went and cooked and prepared food, and they came here at the edge of the forest, at the entrance of this monastery, waiting to see you." And he says, Lord Buddha's, you can see his disgust with this celebrity status that people had given. He even says this, "Nowadays I can't even go to the bathroom without somebody following me. I just can't wait for just to be alone," he says. He says those words in the sutta. You find it in the Anguttara Nikaya, by the way, Nagita Sutta. Man, it doesn't happen once, by the way. Huh? And then you have Venerable Nagita saying, "Bhante, this is what happens. This is, like he's almost like a liaison, trying to become a soft, spoken liaison, go-between between the two." So if you were a person from today and you hear Lord Buddha say that, you say, oh, how ungrateful. These people made food and brought it all the way to your feet, and this is how you treat them. That's what we have today. Several times Lord Buddha sent back monks who had come, like I was saying earlier, who had come a long way to see him, and he would just push them back and said, "Get out of here. Get out of here," he would say. "You sound like a bunch of fishermen pulling out your food, your bait, basically. Laughing and giggling and talking. Get out," he says. He kicks them out of the monastery. Today's softy, wokeist culture will look at that and say, "Oh, Bhante, you're being so mean." That's what we have today. And by the way, this is not about like the millennials, okay? No, I've seen this in 70-year-olds in Asia. I've seen this. People who have become used to, well, Ajahn so-and-so is so nice. He never speaks loudly. He never scolds anyone. I don't know what to say to that, other than I'm sorry to see somebody think like that. What can I say? That is the responsibility of the teacher to be authentic, which they're not. Because I say they're not because there are many occasions that the teacher will have to scold, will have to really discipline the student, the listener. If they're doing something stupid, your job as a teacher is to say, call it out, say, that is stupid, you got to stop doing that. And not be afraid that if I say that, well, he's a doctor, they drive a Bentley, or they're supporters, they're the big donors of this monastery, this temple, I might just end up, kissing that goodbye, as they say. That's support. Well, that's the problem, because you're thinking about the next wing of your monastery. How are you going to secure the funding for that? Because there's a big billboard that you have. Almost every temple I've been to has this huge wall, it used to be like a bulletin board or something. Now it's like I've been surprised to see an entire wall dedicated to donors lists. Well, if the person is giving 500 euros or 500,000, there was one time I heard an abbot of one temple tell me, I was a layman then, Candana, do you know so-and-so, big, wealthy donor, doctor, he paid off the debts, the mortgage debts of this other temple. Oh, lucky them. So, let's say that donor does something that is questionable, that is adhamma. Would that abbot, you think, pick up the phone and say, "Excuse me, I'm going to have to say that you're living an akusala life. I can't accept that donation"? Would he dare say that? Unfortunately not. And that means that they have sacrificed their role, their robes, and especially the Dhamma. The Dhamma is challenging, is supposed to be challenging you out of your status quo. Anything that works is going to be used by Lord Buddha. And anybody living by the example of Lord Buddha's and the Arya Savakas is going to utilize those same methods, because their heart is set on the Dhamma, nothing else. They're not in a popularity contest, which modern day bhikkhus are. Not just the bhikkhus, but the other traditions as well. Mahayana and Vajrayana, same lot. That's not why we become monks. But that is my opinion. But it is supported by the Dhamma, by the suttas. That's why it's called the higher ordination. That's why it's called going forth. You go forth and away from whatever type of a lifestyle you've had. Whether you've been accepted or not. Whether you've received enough hugs from your mommy or daddy or somebody or not. Whether you've been an orphan or not. You leave it all behind and go forth. You must relinquish not just your clothes. Before you relinquish your lay clothing, you must relinquish your own ideas that often go against the Dhamma. Those are things that you must relinquish. That is why it's pabbaja, it's going forth. Not towards maximizing your situation so that you can bring up more of your own ideas and infuse them and build them in the shape of the Dhamma, but in essence we know what it is. And then you claim that it is Dhamma. No, it's not. No, it's not. The Dhamma is not soft. It is when it needs to be. Depending on the situation, the circumstances. It requires a versatility. And it requires, at times, harshness, strictness, rigidity, as well as being as soft as a lotus petal. As sweet as honey. It's always honey. It's just your ears that are not hearing it as such. It's your tongue that is not able to identify that because it's too dirty. You have to scrape it clean. Dismantle your ideas about the Dhamma and about the teacher teaching the Dhamma.